Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Welcome to this segment of Code Gurbani's a-sabad-a-day. Our recitation continues from Gauri Mahalla Panjama. Gauri Mahalla Panjama, Ka ki Maie, Ka ko Baap, Naam Tarik, Jhoote Sabbe Saak, काहे को मूर्ख बखलाया मिल संजोग हुक्म तू आया एक का माटी एक का जोत एक पवन कहाँ कौन रोत मेरा मेरा कर बिल लाही मरणहार एह जियरा नाही कहो नानक गुर खोले कपाट मुक्त भये बिन से परम थाट. This passage is an interrogation into the relationships that are taken for granted as permanent and real. The Guru begins by questioning, Ka ki Maie, Ka ko Baap. Ka ki, literally, whose father, whose mother. It can also be read as whence the mother and whence the father. So this is a question. The folks that we call mother and father, what is the true relationship? Naam tarik jhoote sabbe saak. Very clear. Naam tarik. They are just nominal names. They are for name only. Otherwise, jhoote sabbe saak. Jhoote, in common parlance, means false, but the implication here is that these relationships are transient. They're ephemeral, they don't last, they are short-lived. Now, while the union of the father and the mother is indeed the source of the human body, but what Guruji is saying here is Naam Tariq. They are no more than tags, labels, that actually signify a natural reproductive process. So we are really applying labels through our language to a natural process. And mother and father, what we call a mother and a father, are simply the medium through which we emerge into this world. And so therefore, mother and father are simply functions. The implications are quite radical if you think about this passage. The relationships that we call mother and father, according to this passage, do not really exist except as a delusion of the ego of Maie, which is created and conditioned by culture. So it is our conditioning that causes us to see these as permanent, or these relationships even as real. Because in the next verse, the Guru makes that clear. Kahe ko? He asks why. Murkh bakhlaya. Why does the ignorant fool freak out? In other words, the reference here is that when mother and father pass on, the spiritually ignorant freak out, cry, they wail, they sob. And the Guru is saying, why? Because mil sanjog hukam tu aya. You have come here because the immutable hukam has caused you to come. To do what? Mil sanjog, to achieve union. But the spiritually ignorant fasten themselves to these relationships and therefore suffer when these relationships or seeming relationships cease. Now, Mil Sanjog Hukamatu Aya, this phrase has been translated in other translations to read past associations brought you together with your parents. Now, we've chosen to read this phrase differently because to suggest past associations would imply continuity and permanence, and therefore it would negate the assertion that all relationships are ephemeral, the statement in the first verse. So therefore, it is more appropriate perhaps to read this as a suggestion that our coming into this world is decreed by providence, the providence of Hukam, the immutable law that brings us into this existence for a purpose, which is Milisanjog, self-realization. So that perhaps is more consistent with the idea of relationships, relatives being transitory or ephemeral, not having a real existence. And then the Guru goes on to say, Eka Mati, Eka Jyot, Eko Pavan. Kahan kaun roth? Who are you really mourning? Because the same clay, the same light, and the same breath runs through all. We are shaped by the same clay, we are informed by the same light, and the same breath animates us. In other words, there really is no difference. So who are you really crying for? When there is the differentiation that we have made is really an illusion. It is actually the basis of our root delusion, param, as is pointed out in the concluding verse at the end. But what that leads to is mera kar billahi. When we take these relationships to be real, then when they cease, we sob aloud and cry, I have lost my father, I have lost my mother, mine, my. But the Guru says, Maranhar eh jiyara nahi. This jiyara is not subjected to death. It is eternal. So jiyara, a variation on jeev or living entity, is a pointer to the essential self within, to consciousness. The jiyara is eternal, but perceives, or rather misperceives, and is affected by mental states produced by Maya in its engagement through the senses, and it comes to identify with the material body. And that is the root of its delusions, including mistaking mother, father for permanent relationships. Kaho Nanak, Nanak proclaims, Gure, Gur wisdom, through Gur wisdom, Khole Kapat, Gur wisdom opened the door. Mukta bhai, I was liberated. Binse param thought, I was liberated from the delusions that had crowded my mind. On that note, until the next time, Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.